She doesn't belong here. 4 words that would cost this tech empire everything. But the woman quietly pushing a cleaning cart had no idea she was about to witness the most expensive oversight of their careers. When billionaire CEO Logan Prescott's $2.3 billion Chinese deal collapsed because of a translation disaster, his arrogant executives had no clue that salvation was standing right there in their conference room, dismissed as just the janitor. Watch as Kenya Moore transforms from invisible cleaner to indispensable negotiator when she speaks flawless Mandarin to shocked Chinese executives, reveals her master's degree in East Asian studies that no one bothered to discover, and becomes the hero of a viral story that destroys careers and reshapes an entire industry. But what she demands in exchange for saving the company will prove that true power isn't about climbing corporate ladders, it's about building them for others who've been left behind. This isn't just about one woman's incredible transformation, it's about the moment when hidden brilliance finally got its chance to shine and changed everything about how we see talent, worth, and the extraordinary people we walk past every day. Stay until the end to see how 4 words of dismissal became the catalyst for the most powerful comeback in corporate history. She doesn't belong here. Those 4 words would cost this tech empire everything they thought they knew about talent. But the woman quietly pushing a cleaning cart in the corner had no idea she was about to witness the most expensive oversight of their careers. What happened next in this billion-dollar boardroom will shock you, but first, let me tell you about Kenya Moore and why this seemingly ordinary Tuesday in San Francisco was about to become corporate legend. The 42nd floor of the Prescott Tower gleamed like a monument to Silicon Valley ambition, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the bay, and where the conference room alone cost more than most people's houses. This wasn't just any business meeting. This was the culmination of 3 years of negotiations for a $2.3 billion artificial intelligence partnership that would reshape global technology. The air itself seemed electric with possibility, charged by the presence of executives whose decisions affected millions of lives and moved billions of dollars with a single signature. Logan Prescott paced the polished marble floors like a caged tiger, his $1,000 Italian shoes clicking with the nervous energy of someone who had built an empire but was about to face his greatest challenge. At 45, he'd revolutionized cloud computing, transformed data security, and created technologies that were now essential infrastructure for half the world's internet. His company employed over 80,000 people across 6 continents, and his personal wealth exceeded the GDP of small nations. But today, none of that mattered. Today, he was minutes away from either securing the deal that would cement his legacy or watching 3 years of preparation crumble because of a phone call that had shattered his carefully orchestrated plans. His professional translator, the one person who could navigate the complex cultural and linguistic requirements of this historic negotiation, had called in sick with what sounded suspiciously like food poisoning from a sketchy sushi restaurant. "Where the hell is backup?" Prescott demanded, his voice carrying the edge of someone who was accustomed to problems being solved before he even knew they existed. His executive team scrambled with the desperate energy of people whose careers depended on making the impossible happen, but the reality was devastating. Every qualified Mandarin interpreter in the Bay Area was either unavailable or already booked for other high-stakes meetings. The Chinese delegation from Shanghai AI Dynamics was arriving in 20 minutes, led by CEO Wang Chen, a brilliant but notoriously traditional businessman who had walked away from deals worth billions when he felt disrespected by Western companies who didn't understand the nuances of Chinese business culture. This wasn't just about language, it was about respect, protocol, and the kind of cultural sensitivity that could make or break international partnerships. In the corner of this chaos, almost invisible against the backdrop of frantic executives and desperate phone calls, Kenya Moore quietly emptied wastebaskets and wiped down surfaces with the practiced efficiency of someone who had perfected the art of being present but unnoticed. Her sleek, Straight hair was pulled back in a professional bun, her cleaning uniform was immaculate, and her movements carried a grace that suggested education and refinement that no one in the room bothered to observe. What they couldn't know was that this unassuming woman possessed exactly what they needed most, not just fluency in Mandarin, but a master's degree in East Asian Studies from Georgetown University, and the kind of cultural competency that could navigate the most sensitive international negotiations. She'd spent 2 years in Beijing as a Fulbright scholar, had worked as a cultural liaison for Fortune 500 companies, and spoke 6 languages with the fluency of someone who understood that communication was about far more than words. As the chaos intensified and Prescott's dream deal balanced on the edge of disaster, Kenya continued her work with quiet dignity, unaware that she was about to become the most important person in the room. If you believe that talent exists in the most unexpected places, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you think Kenya should do. This story is about to unfold in ways that will challenge everything you thought you knew about worth, recognition, and the power of being underestimated. Subscribe because stories about hidden brilliance and second chances inspire all of us to see people differently. Right at that moment, as the countdown to disaster ticked closer, the discrimination that Kenya had endured for months was about to reveal itself with stunning clarity. What happened next would prove that prejudice doesn't pause for billion-dollar deals, it thrives in moments when pressure exposes people's true character. Senior Vice President Richard Hawthorne, a silver-haired man whose Ivy League credentials were matched only by his sense of entitlement, noticed Kenya methodically cleaning near the presentation screen. His face twisted with the kind of irritation reserved for inconveniences that disrupted his carefully controlled world. "Why is the janitor still in here?" he snapped, his voice cutting through the conference room like a knife. "This isn't a cafeteria. We're trying to conduct serious business." Kenya paused in her work, her hands steady on the cleaning cloth, despite the familiar sting of being reduced to her uniform rather than recognized as a human being. She'd heard variations of this dismissal countless times over the past 8 months, but it never stopped hurting. The assumption that her presence somehow contaminated their important work revealed more about their character than hers. Executive Assistant Miranda Wells, whose designer suit cost more than Kenya's monthly salary, let out a condescending laugh that echoed off the glass walls. "Seriously, can we get some professional boundaries here? We're dealing with real business, not mopping up spills." The comment hit like a physical blow, reducing Kenya's careful, methodical work to something beneath their notice. She continued cleaning with the dignity of someone who refused to let other people's ignorance define her worth, but inside, she felt the familiar weight of being invisible despite standing right in front of them. Director of Operations Michael Sterling didn't even look up from his phone as he added his own dismissive comment. "Let's keep the background noise down. Some of us are trying to save a $2 billion deal here." Background noise. That's what 8 years of higher education, 2 years of international experience, and fluency in 6 languages had been reduced to background noise in a room where her expertise could have solved their crisis in minutes. Kenya felt the bitter irony of being dismissed as irrelevant while possessing exactly what they desperately needed. What made the situation even more painful was how naturally the disrespect flowed from each executive, as if dismissing her was as automatic as breathing. They didn't see her intelligence, her education, or her potential. They saw only a uniform and made assumptions that revealed the depth of their prejudice. Kenya moved to the back corner of the room, her cleaning cart positioned where she could observe the growing panic without drawing further attention to herself. She watched Logan Prescott frantically cycling through contacts on his phone, his desperation growing as each call ended in disappointment. She listened as his team threw out increasingly desperate suggestions: Google Translate, hiring a college student, even attempting to conduct the meeting in broken English. Through it all, Kenya remained silent, her professional demeanor intact despite the constant stream of microaggressions. She knew something they didn't, that their salvation was standing right there in front of them, invisible in plain sight. But she also knew that revealing her capabilities now would only invite more skepticism and disbelief. The executives who had just dismissed her as background noise were about to discover that sometimes the most qualified person in the room is the one you refuse to see. But the tragedy had not stopped yet. What happened next would prove that desperation makes people do foolish things, and Logan Prescott was about to make the kind of mistake that would turn a salvageable situation into an international incident that could destroy his company's reputation forever. The mahogany conference room doors opened with the gravity of a courtroom entrance, and CEO Wang Chen led his delegation of 5 executives into the space with the measured dignity of someone who had built an empire on precision and respect. Their tailored suits and confident bearing commanded immediate attention, but their expressions showed the polite wariness of business people who had traveled halfway around the world and expected professional competence. Logan Prescott rose to greet them, his smile forced but genuine as he attempted to project confidence he didn't feel. "Welcome to San Francisco, Mr. Wang. We're honored to have you here." Wang Chen nodded respectfully, then spoke in rapid Mandarin to his team, clearly expecting translation that never came. The silence stretched like a tightrope, tension building with each passing second as both sides realized they were facing a communication crisis that threatened to derail 3 years of careful negotiation. Desperation driving logic from his mind, Prescott pulled out his iPhone with the frantic energy of someone grasping at digital straws. "Let me just use this translation app," he announced, his voice carrying the false confidence of someone trying to convince himself as much as his guests. Kenya watched from her corner position with growing alarm as she saw Prescott typing into what appeared to be a generic translation program. Her years of cultural training told her exactly what was about to happen, but she remained silent, knowing that any intervention from the janitor would only invite more ridicule from his team. The app produced its translation, and Prescott read it aloud with the awkward pronunciation of someone butchering a language he didn't understand. What he intended as a respectful welcome instead came out as a phrase that questioned Wang Chen's family honor and suggested improper business practices, one of the most offensive possible mistranslations in Chinese business culture. The effect was immediate and devastating. Wang Chen's face darkened with the kind of controlled anger that comes from being deeply insulted by someone who doesn't even realize what they've done. His delegation exchanged shocked glances, their polite expressions replaced by the cold formality of people who had been gravely disrespected. "I think there has been a misunderstanding," Wang Chen said in perfect English, his tone carrying the finality of someone who had heard enough. "Perhaps we should postpone this meeting until you have proper preparation." Prescott's face went pale as he realized that his technological solution had become a cultural catastrophe. "Mr. Wang, please, I meant no disrespect." But the damage was done. Wang Chen began gathering his documents with the efficient movements of someone who had made a decision. His team followed suit, their disappointment palpable as they prepared to walk away from a deal that had promised to benefit both companies. The room erupted in whispered panic as Prescott's executives realized they were watching $2.3 billion slip away because of a translation app disaster. In seconds, the meeting would be over, the deal dead, and Prescott's reputation in international business permanently damaged. That's when a soft but confident voice rose from the back corner of the room, speaking in flawless Mandarin with the cultural sensitivity that could save everything. "If I may, allow me to clarify. No one expected what happened next. But sometimes the most powerful moments occur when the person everyone ignores finally decides to speak." What unfolded in that conference room would prove that brilliance doesn't announce itself with expensive suits. It reveals itself in moments when expertise meets opportunity, and dignity refuses to stay silent any longer. Every head in the room turned toward the back corner where Kenya Moore stood beside her cleaning cart, but now she seemed transformed. The same woman they had dismissed as background noise was speaking in flawless Mandarin with the kind of cultural fluency that takes years to master. Her tone carried the respectful formality required for high-level Chinese business negotiations, and her pronunciation was so perfect that Wang Chen's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Honorable Mr. Wang," Kenya continued in Mandarin, her voice carrying across the stunned silence. "Mr. Prescott intended to express his deep respect for your journey here and his gratitude for the trust you've shown in considering this partnership. Unfortunately, technology failed to convey the sincerity of his welcome." The Chinese delegation stopped packing their documents, clearly intrigued by this unexpected development. Wang Chen studied Kenya with the sharp attention of someone who recognized authentic expertise when he heard it. Richard Hawthorne's mouth fell open in shock. "Who is she?" he whispered to Miranda Wells, who could only stare in disbelief at the woman she had just dismissed as a distraction. Kenya stepped forward with the confident grace of someone who finally had permission to use her abilities. She addressed Wang Chen directly, incorporating cultural references and historical context that demonstrated not just linguistic skill but deep understanding of Chinese business philosophy. As the ancient saying goes, Kenya continued in Mandarin, "A tree that grows in good soil bears sweet fruit." Mr. Prescott believes that partnerships built on mutual respect and shared innovation create prosperity for all involved. Wang Chen smiled for the first time since entering the room. "Your Mandarin is exceptional," he replied in English, clearly impressed. "May I ask where you studied?" "Georgetown University, with additional studies at Beijing University," Kenya responded, switching effortlessly between languages. "I also had the honor of serving as a Fulbright scholar in China for 2 years." The transformation in the room was electric. The executives who had been preparing for the worst now watched in amazement as Kenya not only salvaged the situation, but elevated it beyond their most optimistic expectations. Logan Prescott stared at her with the expression of someone discovering a hidden treasure in his own backyard. But Kenya wasn't finished demonstrating her cultural competency. She turned to the delegation and made a subtle joke in Mandarin about the reliability of technology versus human wisdom, earning genuine laughter from Wang Chen and his team. The tension that had filled the room just minutes earlier dissolved into the warm atmosphere of people who understood and respected each other. "I don't understand," Michael Sterling stammered, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by confused amazement. "You're the janitor, right? You can't be serious about this." Kenya turned to face him with the calm dignity of someone who had spent months enduring exactly this kind of assumption. "I am serious about this," she replied with gentle firmness. "I also happen to hold a master's degree in East Asian Studies, speak 6 languages, and have facilitated international negotiations for Fortune 500 companies." The silence that followed was deafening. Every executive in the room was forced to confront the reality that they had been working alongside someone infinitely more qualified than themselves, someone they had dismissed and ignored based purely on her job title and the color of her skin. Wang Chen addressed the room in English, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had just witnessed something remarkable. "In my 30 years of international business, I have rarely encountered such linguistic and cultural expertise. Why is this woman not leading your international division?" Logan Prescott felt the weight of that question like a physical blow. His entire highly paid executive team had failed in the moment that mattered most, while the woman they had treated as invisible had just saved the most important deal of his career. Richard Hawthorne tried to regain control of the situation, his voice carrying the desperate authority of someone whose worldview was crumbling. "Mr. Wang, I'm not sure we should." "Let her speak," Prescott interrupted, his voice cutting through the conference room with newfound respect and growing recognition of just how badly his company had failed this remarkable woman. The deal that had been lost was suddenly very much alive again, but the real transformation was just beginning. Kenya Moore was about to show everyone in that room what happened when talent finally gets the recognition it deserves. If you believe that brilliance can be found in the most unexpected places and that everyone deserves to be seen for their true capabilities, hit that like button. And let me know in the comments what you think should happen to those executives who dismissed Kenya. This story is about to reach new heights as we see what happens when hidden talent finally gets its moment to shine. Subscribe, because stories like this remind us all to look deeper and never judge someone's worth by their job title. Right at that moment, the entire hierarchy of the conference room shifted as Kenya Moore transformed from invisible janitor to indispensable negotiator. What happened next would prove that true power isn't about titles or corner office sets, it's about competence, and Kenya was about to demonstrate what happened when expertise finally found its voice. With Logan Prescott's blessing, Kenya moved from the shadows to the center of the room, her cleaning cart forgotten, as she took her place at the negotiation table with the natural authority of someone who belonged there. The Chinese delegation watched with obvious respect as she facilitated not just translation, but the kind of cultural bridge building that turned business transactions into meaningful partnerships. "Mr. Wang," Kenya said, seamlessly switching between Mandarin and English as she outlined the partnership's benefits, "Mr. Prescott's vision aligns beautifully with the Chinese concept of Guangxi building relationships that benefit multiple generations. This isn't just about technology transfer. It's about creating a legacy of innovation that honors both American creativity and Chinese wisdom." Wang Chen leaned forward, clearly engaged by Kenya's sophisticated understanding of both business strategy and cultural values. "This is exactly the kind of thinking we hope to find in American partners," he replied in Mandarin, directing his comment to Kenya rather than Prescott. "Someone who understands that successful partnerships require more than contracts, they require respect." The executives who had dismissed Kenya just minutes earlier now watched in stunned silence as she effortlessly navigated complex negotiations that had been beyond their capabilities. Her fluency wasn't just linguistic, it was cultural, emotional, and strategic in ways that their expensive MBA educations had never taught them. Richard Hawthorne, unable to accept that his authority had been superseded by someone he considered beneath him, stepped forward with the desperate aggression of someone whose worldview was crumbling. "Now wait just a minute," he interrupted, his voice carrying the entitled indignation of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. "She's not authorized to represent our company in these negotiations." The interruption hung in the air like a toxic cloud, revealing the depth of his prejudice and his inability to accept that competence could exist outside his narrow definition of qualifications. Wang Chen's expression cooled as he witnessed this display of disrespect toward the person who had just saved their meeting. Logan Prescott's response was swift and decisive, his voice cutting through the tension with the authority of someone who had finally recognized what real leadership looked like. "She is now," he declared, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Kenya, please continue." The validation was electric. Kenya straightened her shoulders with the confidence of someone who had finally been given permission to use her full capabilities, while the executives who had belittled her were forced to confront the reality that their assumptions had been completely wrong. As Kenya resumed the negotiations, something magical happened in that conference room. The artificial barriers between cultures began to dissolve as she facilitated genuine understanding between two very different business philosophies. She didn't just translate words, she translated intentions, values, and visions in ways that created trust where there had been confusion. The artificial intelligence applications we're discussing, Kenya explained to both sides, represent a fusion of American innovation speed with Chinese strategic patience. Mr. Prescott's team brings revolutionary algorithms, while Mr. Wang's company offers the manufacturing precision and market access that can bring these innovations to billions of users. Wang Chen nodded enthusiastically, clearly impressed by Kenya's ability to synthesize complex technological concepts with cultural sensitivity. "This young woman understands what partnership truly means," he said to his delegation in Mandarin before switching to English. "Mr. Prescott, you are fortunate to have such talent in your organization." The irony was devastating. The woman they had treated as furniture was being praised by a billionaire CEO as their company's greatest asset. The executives who had spent years climbing corporate ladders found themselves sitting silent while someone they had never bothered to know commanded the respect of international business leaders. Miranda Wells shifted uncomfortably in her designer suit, finally understanding that all her credentials meant nothing compared to Kenya's actual expertise. Michael Sterling stared at his phone, unable to meet anyone's eyes as he realized his casual dismissal of Kenya had revealed his own limitations rather than hers. But the most powerful moment came when Wang Chen made a request that would forever change the dynamics of Prescott Industries. "Mr. Prescott," he said, with the authority of someone offering a $2.3 billion partnership, "I would like Miss Moore to be our primary liaison for this project. Her understanding of both cultures will be essential for our success." The words transformed Kenya from janitor to indispensable executive in a single sentence, while simultaneously exposing just how badly Prescott's company had failed to recognize the talent that had been working among them all along. Logan Prescott looked around the room at his highly paid executives, then at Kenya, who had just accomplished in 30 minutes what they had failed to do in 3 years of preparation. The choice was obvious, but the implications would reshape everything about how his company identified and valued talent. But the most powerful revelation was yet to come. What Kenya shared next would prove that brilliance often hides behind circumstances rather than choice, and her story would shatter every assumption that Logan Prescott and his executives had made about worth, opportunity, and the invisible barriers that keep extraordinary people in ordinary jobs. As the Chinese delegation took a break to discuss the revised partnership terms, Logan Prescott approached Kenya with the humility of someone who had just discovered a diamond in his own backyard. The conference room had mostly emptied, leaving just the two of them surrounded by the scattered papers and abandoned coffee cups of a negotiation that had been transformed from disaster to triumph. "Kenya," Logan said, his voice carrying a mix of gratitude and genuine curiosity, "I have to ask, why are you working as a janitor? You just facilitated the most important business negotiation in my company's history. You clearly have qualifications that surpass most of my executive team." Kenya looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the San Francisco skyline, her expression showing the weight of someone who had carried a story she'd never been asked to tell. When she turned back to Logan, her eyes held both strength and vulnerability, the look of someone who had learned to be resilient without becoming bitter. 3 years ago, I was exactly where you'd expect someone with my background to be," Kenya began, her voice steady but tinged with the pain of loss. "I was a senior cultural liaison for a Fortune 500 consulting firm, traveling the world, facilitating international partnerships, making 6 figures. I had the corner office, the expense account, the respect of colleagues who valued my expertise." Logan listened with growing amazement, trying to reconcile the image she was painting with the woman who had been emptying trash cans in his conference room just hours earlier. "But then my mother was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's," Kenya continued, her voice softening with the tenderness reserved for discussing those we love most. "She was only 58, and she was my world. She'd raised me as a single mother, worked 3 jobs to put me through college, sacrificed everything so I could have opportunities she never had." The emotion in Kenya's voice was palpable, and Logan found himself leaning forward, completely absorbed in a story that was reshaping his understanding of success, sacrifice, and the hidden struggles of people he'd never bothered to know. "The progression was rapid and devastating," Kenya said, her hands unconsciously smoothing her cleaning uniform as she spoke. "Within 18 months she couldn't remember my name, couldn't live alone, needed round-the-clock care, the kind of care that costs more than most people make in a year." Logan felt his chest tighten as he began to understand the impossible choice Kenya had faced, a choice between career advancement and family loyalty that no one should have to make. "Corporate consulting requires constant travel, long hours, total availability," Kenya explained, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had made a heartbreaking decision with grace and dignity. "I couldn't be in Shanghai negotiating deals while my mother was alone and afraid, not recognizing the faces of her caretakers. So I left." The simple statement carried enormous weight. Logan realized that Kenya hadn't failed to achieve success. She had chosen love over ambition, family over career advancement, and had paid a price that few people would be willing to pay. I needed a job that would let me control my schedule, that wouldn't require travel, that would give me the flexibility to be there for her whenever she needed me. Kenya continued, janitorial work offered something that corporate consulting couldn't, the ability to leave at the end of my shift and be fully present for the person who mattered most. Logan sat in stunned silence, processing the reality that the woman his executives had dismissed as unqualified had actually made sacrifices for love that they couldn't even comprehend. Her current job wasn't a reflection of her limitations, it was evidence of her character. For 2 years I worked nights here and spent days with her, Kenya said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke about her mother's care. I read to her, played her favorite music, held her hand when she was confused and scared. When she passed 6 months ago, I knew I'd made the right choice. I was there for every moment that mattered. The grief in her voice was real but peaceful, the grief of someone who had no regrets about the choices she'd made. Logan felt a profound respect for this woman, who had given up everything to honor the person who had given her everything. After the funeral, I thought about going back to consulting, Kenya admitted, but I'd been out of that world for 3 years. Technology had changed, contacts had moved on, and honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to return to a life where business deals mattered more than human relationships. Logan understood now why Kenya had remained in a job that underutilized her abilities. It wasn't about lack of opportunity or qualification, it was about finding peace after profound loss, about choosing a life that honored what truly mattered. So I stayed, Kenya concluded with a slight smile. The work is honest, it pays the bills, and it gave me time to figure out what comes next. I never expected what comes next to happen in a conference room where I was supposed to be invisible. Logan looked at this remarkable woman with newfound respect, understanding that her story wasn't about falling from success, it was about redefining what success meant when faced with love, loss, and the choice between career advancement and human dignity. Kenya, he said quietly, you didn't fall from grace, you chose grace over everything else. What happened next would prove that sometimes the most qualified person in the room is the one whose qualifications extend far beyond any resume. No one expected what happened next, but in the age of social media, extraordinary moments don't stay private for long. What unfolded over the following 24 hours would prove that sometimes justice comes not from corporate boardrooms, but from the collective voice of people who refuse to let excellence go unrecognized. Dr. Li Wei, the youngest member of Wang Chen's delegation, had been quietly documenting the day's events on his phone, not for any official purpose, but because he recognized he was witnessing something historically significant. As a Stanford MBA who had experienced his own share of discrimination in American business schools, he understood the profound importance of what Kenya had accomplished. That evening, as the Chinese delegation settled into their San Francisco hotel, Dr. Li crafted a post for WeChat that would change everything. He wrote in both Mandarin and English, ensuring maximum reach across both cultures. Today I witnessed something extraordinary in American business. A woman working as a janitor overlooked, dismissed, treated as invisible saved a $2.3 billion partnership with expertise that surpassed every executive in the room. Kenya Moore speaks flawless Mandarin, holds advanced degrees, and demonstrated the kind of cultural intelligence that builds bridges between nations. Yet she was cleaning floors while lesser minds sat at the negotiation table. This is what happens when we judge competence by appearance rather than capability. The post included a photo of Kenya speaking with Wang Chen, her confident posture and engaged expression telling a story that transcended language barriers. Within 2 hours, the post had been shared thousands of times across Chinese social media platforms, with comments ranging from admiration for Kenya to criticism of American corporate culture. But the real explosion came when Dr. Li's post crossed over to American social media. A Stanford classmate translated and shared it on LinkedIn, where it caught the attention of Maria Rodriguez, a tech journalist for TechCrunch, who immediately recognized the story's significance. Black Janitor saves $2 billion tech deal with Mandarin mastery, read the headline that appeared on TechCrunch at 6 a.m. Pacific Time. The article, which Maria had worked on through the night, detailed not just the dramatic negotiation rescue, but the systemic issues that had kept someone of Kenya's caliber invisible to her own colleagues. The story went viral with the speed and intensity of a Silicon Valley product launch. Within 6 hours, it had been picked up by CNN, BBC, Bloomberg, and every major news outlet in the world. Kenya More began trending globally, with millions of people sharing their own stories of being underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed based on appearance rather than ability. Logan Prescott arrived at his office the next morning to find his phone buzzing with interview requests, his email inbox flooded with messages, and a crowd of reporters gathered in the lobby of Prescott Tower. The story had become bigger than his company, bigger than the deal itself. It had become a symbol of everything wrong with how corporate America identified and valued talent. But not everyone was celebrating Kenya's triumph. Richard Hawthorne arrived at work to find his own social media accounts under siege. With screenshots of security footage showing his dismissive treatment of Kenya being shared alongside comments about his arrogance and prejudice. The man who had spent decades building a reputation as a sophisticated executive was now being exposed as someone whose biases had nearly cost his company billions. Miranda Wells faced similar scrutiny, with former colleagues coming forward to share stories about her condescending treatment of support staff and her habit of judging people by their job titles rather than their character. The designer suits and Ivy League credentials that had once defined her success were now being reframed as symbols of unearned privilege. By noon, Logan Prescott knew he had to act decisively. The world was watching, and his response would define not just his company's future, but his own legacy as a leader. He called an emergency board meeting and made announcements that would reverberate throughout corporate America. Effective immediately, Prescott declared in a press conference that was broadcast live across multiple platforms, Richard Hawthorne and Miranda Wells are being terminated for conduct that violates our company's core values of respect and inclusion. Their treatment of Kenya More was not only morally reprehensible, but it nearly cost us the most important partnership in our company's history. The termination sent shockwaves through Silicon Valley, where executives suddenly realized that discriminatory behavior could have career-ending consequences even when it didn't rise to the level of legal violations. Corporate lawyers across the tech industry began updating policies and conducting emergency sensitivity training. But Prescott wasn't finished. Today, I'm announcing the launch of the Prescott Foundation for Hidden Talent, a program designed to identify and support brilliant individuals who have been overlooked by traditional corporate hiring practices. We're also implementing mandatory unconscious bias training for all management staff, and we're establishing a new policy requiring diverse interview panels for all executive positions. The announcements were met with applause from the gathered media, but the most powerful moment came when reporters asked about Kenya's future with the company. I've offered Kenya a position as our new Director of Global Cultural Strategy, Prescott revealed, but she's made it clear that any role she accepts must include a commitment to systemic change, not just personal advancement. Meanwhile, Kenya found herself at the center of a media storm she had never sought. Job offers poured in from companies around the world, tech giants, offering seven-figure salaries, consulting firms promising partnership tracks, universities extending teaching positions. But she remained focused on something more important than personal gain. In a statement released through Prescott Industries' communications team, Kenya addressed the global attention with characteristic grace. This story isn't about mates. About the millions of talented people who are undervalued, overlooked, or dismissed because they don't fit someone's narrow definition of success. Real change happens when we start seeing people for their capabilities rather than their circumstances. The media coverage continued for days, with Kenya's story becoming a catalyst for conversations about corporate bias, hidden talent, and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to recognize true capability. Business schools began using the case study in their programs, and HR departments across multiple industries started reevaluating their recruitment and promotion practices. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from Wang Chen himself, who issued a public statement praising Kenya's professionalism and announcing that Shanghai AI Dynamics would be implementing similar bias detection programs in their own organization. Ms. Moore reminded us that excellence speaks all languages, Wang Chen stated, and that the most valuable partnerships are built on mutual respect rather than surface impressions. What had begun as a translation crisis had become a transformation catalyst, proving that sometimes the most powerful changes come from the most unexpected sources. But the most powerful transformation was yet to come. What Kenya did next would prove that true leadership isn't about accepting recognition, it's about using that recognition to create opportunities for others who might never get their chance to shine. 3 weeks after the viral storm had transformed her from invisible janitor to international symbol of hidden talent, Kenya Moore stood in the same conference room where her life had changed forever. But everything about this moment was different. The room had been redesigned to reflect inclusive leadership principles. The people gathered around the table represented diverse backgrounds and perspectives, and Kenya herself wore a tailored navy suit that commanded respect while maintaining her natural grace. Logan Prescott had personally invited her to this meeting, not as an employee, but as someone whose wisdom had already proven invaluable to his company's future. The formal offer he was about to make had been crafted not just to recognize her abilities, but to honor her values and her vision for systemic change. "Kenya," Logan began, his voice carrying the humility of someone who had learned profound lessons about leadership and recognition. "I want to offer you the position of Chief of Global Cultural Strategy role we're creating specifically to ensure that what happened to you never happens to anyone else in our organization." The title represented more than just a job. It was an acknowledgement that cultural competency and inclusive leadership were now core business functions rather than afterthoughts. The salary package Logan presented was substantial, reflecting not just Kenya's qualifications but the value she had already brought to the company. But Kenya had spent the past 3 weeks thinking deeply about what kind of change she wanted to create, and her response would demonstrate the same principled thinking that had guided her throughout her career. "Mr. Prescott," Kenya replied, her voice carrying the confident authority of someone who understood her own worth, "I'm honored by your offer, and I'm prepared to accept it, but I have one non-negotiable condition that must be part of my employment agreement." Logan leaned forward, intrigued by what she might require. After witnessing her integrity and strategic thinking, he was prepared to accommodate almost any reasonable request. "I want the company to establish the Hidden Brilliance Scholarship Fund," Kenya announced, her voice growing stronger with each word. "A program specifically designed to support multilingual students from underrepresented communities who want to pursue careers in international business and cultural strategy." The proposal was both personal and strategic, reflecting Kenya's understanding that individual success meant nothing without systemic change. She had experienced firsthand how talent could be overlooked based on circumstances, and she was determined to create pathways for others who might face similar barriers. The fund should provide full scholarships, mentorship programs, and guaranteed internship opportunities, Kenya continued, outlining a vision that extended far beyond her own career advancement. "I want to ensure that the next generation of cultural strategists includes voices from communities that have been historically excluded from these opportunities." Logan felt a surge of respect for this woman who was using her moment of triumph to lift others rather than simply advancing her own position. "Consider it done," he said without hesitation. "How much should we allocate for the first year?" $2 million, Kenya replied, her number carefully calculated to make a meaningful impact, enough to support 20 full scholarships annually, with additional funds for program administration and mentorship infrastructure. The commitment was substantial, but Logan understood that it represented an investment in the kind of diverse leadership that could prevent future blind spots and cultural missteps. Approved, he said, extending his hand to seal the agreement. 6 months later, Kenya Moore walked into her first board meeting as Chief of Global Cultural Strategy, and the transformation was complete. The same room where she had once been dismissed as background noise now welcomed her as an essential voice in strategic decision-making. Her cleaning cart had been replaced by a briefcase containing presentation materials for initiatives that would reshape how Prescott Industries approached international partnerships. But the most powerful moment came when she opened the meeting with words that would become legendary within the company's culture. Let's stop judging fluency by uniforms and start measuring potential by performance. The phrase captured everything about Kenya's journey and her vision for the future, a future where talent would be recognized regardless of how it was packaged, where cultural competency would be valued as highly as technical skills, and where opportunities would be available to brilliant minds regardless of their background. The Hidden Brilliance Scholarship Fund had already received over 3,000 applications from students around the world, each one representing a story of potential that might otherwise have gone unrecognized. The first cohort of scholars included young people who spoke languages ranging from Arabic to Swahili, students who understood cultures from their lived experience rather than textbook study, and individuals whose perspectives would enrich every organization they eventually joined. The program's success had inspired other companies to launch similar initiatives, creating a ripple effect that extended far beyond Prescott Industries. Business schools began recruiting more diverse students. Consulting firms started looking beyond traditional pedigrees for cultural expertise, and international companies recognized that authentic cultural competency required authentic cultural representation. But perhaps the most meaningful validation came during a company celebration marking the first anniversary of the scholarship program. Kenya stood before an audience that included scholarship recipients, company executives, and Wang Chen himself, who had flown from Shanghai to honor the woman who had transformed their business relationship into a true partnership. 1 year ago, Kenya addressed the gathered crowd. I was invisible in this very building. Today, I want every young person watching to know that your potential is never invisible sometimes. It just takes the right moment for the right people to finally open their eyes and see what was always there. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just applause for Kenya's journey, it was recognition of a transformation that had changed how an entire industry thought about talent, potential, and the brilliant minds that exist in unexpected places. As the celebration continued around her, Kenya looked out at the faces of the scholarship recipients and knew that her greatest achievement wasn't the corner office or the impressive title, it was the certainty that brilliance would no longer be hidden simply because it didn't come wrapped in the expected package. She had proven that sometimes the most powerful way to clean up a company isn't with mops and disinfectant, it's with dignity, competence, and the courage to show the world what true leadership looks like. What Kenya Moore accomplished in that San Francisco boardroom wasn't just about saving $1 billion deal, it was about something far more transformative. As someone who's spent years studying organizational behavior and hidden talent, I can tell you that what you just witnessed represents the difference between seeing people and truly recognizing them. Most companies talk about diversity and inclusion in board meetings and policy documents, but Kenya proved what real transformation looks like when we stop judging capability by job titles and start measuring potential by performance. The profound lesson here isn't that we should all become undercover geniuses waiting for our moment. It's that brilliance exists everywhere, often in the places we're least likely to look. Every Richard Hawthorne and Miranda Wells in this story represents a system that mistakes credentials for competence and appearance for ability. while every Kenya Moore represents the extraordinary talent that gets overlooked when we prioritize pedigree over potential. What moves me most about this story is how Kenya used her moment of recognition not for personal revenge, but for systemic change. She could have simply accepted the corner office and moved on, but instead she chose the harder path of creating opportunities for others who might never get their chance to prove their worth. That's the kind of leadership that doesn't just change companies, it changes entire industries and cultures. The reality is that hidden brilliance isn't rare, it's everywhere. In every organization, there are people whose talents far exceed their job descriptions, whose potential has been limited by circumstances rather than capability, and whose contributions could be transformational if someone just took the time to see them. Kenya's story proves that when we start looking beyond uniforms and titles to recognize true competence, we don't just find better employees, we discover better versions of ourselves as leaders. Kenya didn't just speak Mandarin in that conference room, she spoke the universal language of dignity, proving that respect and recognition can transform not only individual lives but entire corporate cultures. Her Hidden Brilliance Scholarship Fund represents more than charity, it's an investment in a future where talent is nurtured regardless of its packaging. If this story inspired you to look more carefully at the people around you, to question your own assumptions about worth and capability, or to recognize that extraordinary often comes disguised as ordinary, smash that like button and let me know in the comments about a time when you discovered hidden talent in an unexpected place. Subscribe to this channel because we're building a community of people who understand that real progress happens when we stop overlooking brilliance and start celebrating it wherever we find it. Hit that notification bell because these stories of transformation and recognition are exactly what our world needs right now. And trust me, the next story of hidden potential will be even more powerful than this one.